Someone in a federal prison cell knows where the bodies are buried, and the people who paid to keep him comfortable are running out of walls. That is not a metaphor. That is April 2026. Sean Combs is sitting inside FCI Fort Dix with a 50-month sentence strapped to his back, appealing a conviction that ripped the mask off an empire built on silence, fear, and favors owed. His lawyer stood before a 3-judge panel 9 days ago, arguing that the whole thing was a miscarriage of justice. But the real miscarriage, the one nobody in that courtroom is authorized to discuss, is what his downfall just accidentally unlocked. Because when a man like Diddy falls, he does not fall alone. He falls through floors, and every floor he crashes through exposes a room that somebody else was using to hide something. 2 of those rooms have names: Kathy White, Kim Porter, and what was stored inside them is now leaking into daylight at a speed that no crisis management team on Earth was built to contain. Let me be surgical about this, because what I am about to walk you through is not speculation stitched together from comment sections. This is a chronological map. Dates, documents, public records, and silences so loud they function as confessions. Every piece, examined alone, has a comfortable explanation. Stack them together, and the comfort evaporates like it was never there. We need to rewind, not to the beginning. The beginning is too clean, too rehearsed, too perfectly lit. We need to start at the fracture point, the moment the cracks became visible to anyone paying close enough attention. Late 2011. A woman named Kathy White is dead. The cause printed on the paperwork: brain aneurysm. Quick, clinical. Case closed before most people knew a case existed. She was 28 years old. She was, by multiple accounts that have circulated persistently for over a decade, romantically entangled with Sean Corey Carter, the man the world calls Jay-Z. She was, according to those same accounts, pregnant. And she was, according to the version of events that refuses to stop resurfacing no matter how many news cycles try to smother it, preparing to take information public that would have detonated the most carefully constructed celebrity marriage in modern history. And then she was gone, just like that. A young woman with a connection to one of the most powerful men in entertainment, carrying what was allegedly his child, on the verge of speaking, silenced permanently by a medical event that arrived with timing so exquisite it almost reads like fiction. But here is where comfortable explanations start sweating. Coroner documentation from that period, according to individuals who have scrutinized the records, carried a word that should have triggered a cascade of follow-up. The word was suspicious. Not as a verdict, not as a conclusion, as a flag. The kind of flag that in any investigation involving a person with no connection to extreme wealth and influence would have generated subpoenas, interviews, forensic deep dives. Instead, it generated nothing. The flag was raised, then it was folded, then it was filed somewhere that nobody with authority seemed interested in revisiting. Now, zoom out, hold that deaf in one hand and pick up what happened 10 weeks later with the other. January 7th, 2012. Blue Ivy Carter enters the world. The announcement is global. The imagery is mythological, a home birth, intimate, sacred, narrated with the kind of reverent detail that transforms a medical event into cultural scripture. Beyonce and Jay-Z become parents, and the story of how it happened is wrapped in so many layers of curated perfection that questioning any part of it feels like sacrilege. Except people did question it, and the reason they questioned it was not paranoia or jealousy or any of the dismissals that were deployed to neutralize the conversation. The reason was footage. Rewind a few months, October 2011. Beyonce appears on an Australian television program. She is visibly pregnant, or visibly something. She sits down during the interview, and her midsection does something that the laws of human biology do not permit a pregnant abdomen to do. It folds, not shifts, not adjusts, folds, collapses inward in a way that is mechanically inconsistent with a body carrying a child. The footage was captured live, it was slowed, it was dissected frame by thousands of women who had carried pregnancies themselves, and who found what they were watching physically impossible to reconcile with their own lived experience. Beyonce's team called the theories ridiculous, stupid, beneath response. And on one level, they were right. Surrogacy is not a scandal. Kim Kardashian carried 2 children herself before a diagnosis of placenta accreta made further pregnancies medically dangerous, and she spoke openly about using surrogates for her younger kids. Nicole Kidman pursued surrogacy after fertility challenges, and the public absorbed the information without malice. Surrogacy is a choice that invites zero legitimate judgment when it is handled with transparency. But that is precisely the point. Transparency is the thing that dissolves suspicion, and in this case, transparency is the one ingredient that has been conspicuously, aggressively, almost militantly withheld. Now hold on, because I need you to understand why the surrogacy question is not actually the question. The surrogacy is the hallway. The question is what is behind the door at the end of it.
If Beyonce's pregnancy was staged, and I am saying if, then the staging was not done to conceal a simple medical decision. It was done to construct a timeline in which Blue Ivy Carter arrived on a specific date, born to a specific mother with a specific origin story, a timeline that would be impossible to maintain if a woman named Kathy White were alive, speaking, and presenting evidence of an alternative paternity situation that would collapse the mythology the Carters had spent years and fortunes engineering. That is the door. Kathy White is behind it, and the question of who closed it and how is what has turned this from a celebrity conspiracy theory into something that a growing number of people believe warrants an actual criminal investigation. But we are not done, not even close, because Kathy White was not the only woman whose proximity to this ecosystem preceded her departure from the living world under circumstances that official records have failed to adequately explain. Enter Kim Porter, and this is where the temperature changes entirely. Kim Porter was not a peripheral figure. She was the mother of multiple children fathered by Sean Combs. She lived inside the architecture of her world for years, a world where Jay-Z was not a distant ally but a foundational ally. The business relationship between Combs and Carter operated at the highest altitude of the music industry for decades. They shared stages, deals, circles, secrets, and Kim Porter, by the sheer physics of proximity, occupied a position from which she could observe the machinery of both empires operating in ways the public was never intended to witness. People close to the situation are now saying she did more than observe. They are saying she documented. The existence of writings attributed to Kim Porter has become one of the most incendiary subjects on online discourse about celebrity power and institutional corruption. A biography incorporating alleged excerpts from her private journal was released, and then pulled from Amazon after her children publicly denounced it as fabricated. But the consensus among those tracking the situation is that whatever was published represented a fraction of what those pages allegedly contained.
And now I need you to brace yourself, because this next part is what separates this entire narrative from standard celebrity drama and pushes it into territory that demands a different kind of attention. Among the allegations attributed to Kim Porter's writings, a claim that she discovered recorded material that Combs had produced of himself engaged in sexual encounters with young men he was managing professionally. The account describes her finding these recordings in a vault. It describes her reaction, visceral, horrified, immediate. And it describes what she allegedly did next. She made copies. One individual allegedly captured in this material was, at the time of recording, 18 years old. That individual, according to the account, later became a household name. Let that land, because if that claim holds even a fragment of truth, if Kim Porter not only discovered those recordings but duplicated them and stored the copies, then everything about what happened to her afterward transforms. It stops being a question about pneumonia. It becomes a question about what powerful men do when a woman holds evidence capable of triggering career-ending prosecutions. Kim Porter was found unresponsive in her home on November 15, 2018. She was 47 years old. The official cause of death, lobar pneumonia. Clean, definitive, case stamped and sealed. Except the details circulating in online communities dedicated to this case paint a picture that the official stamp does not cover. Red-colored fluid reportedly found on her pillowcases, similar discoloration elsewhere in the space where she was discovered. Early documentation that allegedly referenced potential toxic substances before those references vanished from subsequent reports. And perhaps most disturbingly, accounts that the original coroner assigned to her case was removed and replaced by a different medical examiner who ultimately produced the findings that became the public record. None of this carries the weight of confirmed evidence. All of it has been met with either denial or silence. But the conversation refuses to die because the architecture of the situation, a woman who knew too much, who allegedly possessed copied recordings of criminal activity, whose private laptop reportedly disappeared after her death, whose private writings allegedly contained material that powerful people would have existential motivation to suppress, does not resolve itself through official dismissal. It resolves through verified, transparent, independently examined evidence, and that evidence remains a ghost. Here is where the two threads twist into a single rope. Kathy White, Kim Porter, two women, two official causes of death delivered with efficiency and finality, two sets of circumstances that generated questions wildly disproportionate to the investigation those questions received. Two women whose proximity to overlapping centers of power and whose alleged possession of information about that power preceded their deaths by intervals that an increasing number of observers find impossible to file under coincidence. And now, the man who sits at the intersection of Kim Porter's world, the man whose vault allegedly contained those recordings, whose empire allegedly required her silence, is serving federal time. Sean Combs was convicted in July 2025 on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. The racketeering and sex trafficking charges did not stick, but the conviction itself did something far more consequential than put him in a cell. It cracked the foundation. It demonstrated that the machinery of protection, the lawyers, the fixers, the networks of mutual silence that had kept the empire sealed for decades, could be penetrated, could be defeated. And when that crack opened, everything adjacent to it became vulnerable, including, allegedly, the information Kim Porter had been assembling, including the questions surrounding Kathy White that had been compressed into silence for over a decade. A Netflix documentary produced by Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent, Combs' longtime rival, titled Sean Combs: The Reckoning, poured accelerant on an already raging fire. And Jason Lee, a media personality with significant reach, drew public attention to something that had previously circulated only in dedicated investigation communities: alleged physical resemblances between Blue Ivy Carter and Kathy White. The comparison, once surfaced to a mainstream adjacent audience, detonated a new wave of scrutiny that the Carter publicity apparatus has not directly engaged with. Then there is the casket. Reports have circulated claiming that Combs purchased an entire gold casket approximately 1 month before Kim Porter died. 30 days. A burial vessel made of gold, acquired by the father of her children, the epicenter of her world, the subject of documentation she had allegedly been quietly compiling, purchased before she was dead. 1 month before. I am not going to tell you what to conclude from that. I am going to tell you that the detail exists, the timeline has been reported, and in the context of everything else, the diary, the recordings, the missing laptop, the replaced coroner, the discolored pillowcases, it joins a constellation of data points that does not organize itself into a comfortable pattern, no matter how aggressively you try to force it. Now we need to talk about the song, because the song is what blew the roof off the entire discourse and sent it into a velocity it had never previously achieved. Cowboy Carter, Beyonce's genre-deconstructing album, a critical triumph, a cultural reclamation of country music's erased Black origins, an artistic statement of such deliberate intentionality that every syllable, every sequence, every production choice has been characterized by her collaborators as meticulously purposeful. Nothing on a Beyonce record is accidental. That is not an accusation. That is a principle her team has proudly established across decades of work. Which makes what happened with one specific track, Daughter, a problem that no amount of critical acclamation can neutralize. The lyrics contain imagery of violence, a body on a floor, bloodstains on clothing, physical brutality described with granular, almost cinematic specificity. Listeners already familiar with the Kathy White narrative experienced these words and experienced a recognition so immediate and so visceral that the interpretation spread across platforms within hours. This was a confession, embedded in a critically acclaimed album, hidden in plain sight, on a record the entire world was invited to celebrate. That is an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. The evidence, in any form that would satisfy a legal or journalistic threshold, does not currently exist. But here is the counter-argument that Beyoncé's defenders have mounted, and it deserves honest examination. Daughter operates within the murder ballad tradition, a genre with deep roots in country and folk music where artists narrate violent scenarios as artistic exploration, not autobiography. Chon Cash sang about shooting a man in Reno just to watch him die. The Chicks recorded Goodbye Earl about poisoning an abusive husband. Eminem has built entire albums around homicidal fantasy without anyone filing charges.
And, critically, the lyrics of Daughter contain a line that the conspiracy interpretation requires you to ignore. Help me, Lord, from these fantasies in my head. The song explicitly frames its violent imagery as intrusive thoughts, ego-dystonic ideation, a character wrestling with dark impulses, not acting on them. Reading it as a literal confession requires amputating the very line that contextualizes everything around it.
Does that settle it? For some people, absolutely. For others, particularly those who have spent years mapping the Kathy White timeline and who view Beyonce's documented artistic precision as evidence that nothing in her work is unintentional, the murder ballad defense feels insufficient. Because the question they are asking is not whether the genre permits violent imagery. The question is whether a songwriter of Beyonce's caliber accidentally produced lyrics that map onto the most explosive, unresolved controversy in her personal history with a precision that strains the boundaries of coincidence. And for that question, neither the conspiracy interpretation nor the artistic defense provides a definitive answer. What remains is the silence. The Carter camp has not engaged with the specific Kathy White interpretation of Daughter, not a targeted denial, not a legal cease and desist aimed at the theory's most prominent amplifiers, not a direct statement addressing the specific lyrical parallels being drawn, just silence. The same silence that has surrounded the Kathy White situation for over 14 years. The same silence that has met every escalation of public scrutiny with the same calculated non-response. Zoom all the way out. Because from altitude, a pattern becomes visible that individual data points obscure. This is not about gossip. This is not about who slept with whom or which celebrity marriage involves private arrangements that the public was not invited to understand. If even a fraction of what is being discussed carries substance, and the fraction does not need to be large, what is being described involves the deaths of 2 women, potential suppression of physical evidence, deliberate fabrication of public narratives, and the deployment of cultural and financial power to ensure that inconvenient realities remain permanently entombed. That is not tea. That is a structural crisis. And the structure it threatens is not just the Carter-Knowles empire or the wreckage of Combs's legacy. It is the architecture of an entire industry that has perfected, across generations, the art of making problematic truths disappear before they can become public record. Candace Owens carried portions of the Kim Porter material to her platform, injecting the discussion into media ecosystems where it had not previously circulated. Regardless of where you place Owens on the credibility spectrum, her engagement with the material represents a boundary rupture, the conversation migrating from niche investigative communities into territories with exponentially larger audiences and fundamentally different rules of engagement. And the digital archaeology community, the decentralized network of researchers, timeline reconstructors, and pattern analysts who have been mapping these connections for years, is more organized, more persistent, and more technically equipped than it has ever been before. Every public record, every deleted post, every archived interview, every financial filing connected to the principals in this situation is being cataloged, cross-referenced, and pressure-tested with a methodological rigor that would have been impossible a decade ago. The walls built on silence are not engineered for this kind of sustained, distributed assault. Silence works when the number of people asking questions is small enough to ignore and the mechanisms for sharing information is slow enough to outrun. Neither condition applies anymore. The questions are being asked by millions. The information moves at the speed of a screenshot, and every week brings a new data point, a new connection, a new voice willing to speak from closer to the center than the last one.
Kathy White deserves scrutiny applied to her case that matches the severity of the questions it generates. Her family, the child she was allegedly carrying, the circumstances of a death that was flagged as suspicious and then abandoned to administrative silence, all of it requires examination by entities with subpoena power, forensic capability, and institutional independence from the gravitational influence of the people whose interests are served by the case remaining closed. Kim Porter deserves the same. Her children, who have publicly pushed back against the diary narrative, but who cannot push back against the physical evidence questions, the coroner replacement reports, the missing technology, the gold casket timeline, deserve to know whether the official record that sealed their mother's case was the product of thorough, independent medical analysis or something considerably less. And the audience, every person who has consumed the mythology of Beyonce and Jay-Z as presented, every person who has accepted the origin story of Blue Ivy as narrated, every person who mourned Kim Porter based on the pneumonia explanation, deserves to know whether what they were given was truth or production design. Here is what I know for certain. The questions have not been answered. The footage has not been explained. The coroner's hesitation on Kathy White has not been addressed. The circumstances surrounding Kim Porter's death have not been independently reviewed. The full contents of her alleged writings have not been authenticated or published. The laptop has not been accounted for. The casket timeline has not been contextualized by anyone with first-hand knowledge. And the lyrical parallels in Daughter have not been directly engaged with by the only person whose engagement would carry definitive weight. Every single one of those items represents an open circuit, and open circuits do not close themselves. They wait for a document, a testimony, a recording, a single act of courage from someone who was present, and then they close with a force that retroactively reorganizes everything that came before. The people maintaining the silence made a wager. They have bet that the questions will exhaust themselves, that attention spans will contract, that the next news cycle will provide sufficient cover, and the architecture of suppression they have built, the lawyers, the NDAs, the strategic relationships with media gatekeepers, will hold long enough for the statute of limitations on public curiosity to expire. That wager may pay off. It has paid off before for other powerful people in other eras with other secrets. But this era is different. The tools are different. The persistence is different. And the appetite for accountability from audiences who feel they have been systematically deceived is different. And the crack that Sean Combs' conviction opened in the foundation of this interconnected world of protected secrets is widening, not closing. Every appeal hearing, every new civil filing, every cooperating witness looking to reduce their own exposure adds pressure to fractures that were never designed to withstand this kind of sustained force. The next chapter of the story is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And when it arrives, whether through a court filing, a published document, a deathbed testimony, or a single act of courage from someone who has been carrying the weight of what they know for too long, the comfortable architecture of official silence will not collapse gradually. It will collapse the way structures built on hollow foundations always collapse, suddenly, completely, and with a sound that everyone will claim they never heard coming, but that some of us have been listening for since 2011. Sound off below. What do you believe happened to Kathy White? What do you believe happened to Kim Porter? What do you think is sitting in those unpublished pages, on that missing laptop, in the vaults that have not yet been opened? Because this story is accelerating, and the people who built their kingdoms on the assumption that certain truths would never surface are about to discover what happens when the silence they purchased runs out of shelf life.